light, harmony, and power in one deity. Apollo stands among the most revered and multifaceted gods in Greek mythology. As the god of the sun, he illuminates the world. As the deity of music, he brings harmony to the soul. And as the divine healer, he bridges the realms of suffering and relief. Unlike many ancient gods who embody a singular force, Apollo represents a constellation of powerful truth, prophecy, healing, and art. This wide-ranging influence made him central not only to mythological tales, but also to the religious and social life of ancient Greece. Born to Zeus, the king of the gods, and Leto, Apollo was a twin. His sister, Artemis, being the goddess of the moon and the hunt. His birth itself was a tale of endurance and struggle. After being relentlessly pursued by Hera, Leto found refuge on the floating island of Delos, where Apollo was finally born under the shade of a sacred palm tree. From the moment of his birth, Apollo was radiant, and it was said the golden light poured across the earth as he took his first breath. Apollo's presence is felt throughout Greek culture, from the grand Oracle of Delphi, where his voice echoed through priestesses, to the hymns sung in his honor by bards and scholars. He carried a golden lyre, gifted by Hermes, and used it not only to charm the hearts of gods and mortals, but also to maintain universal order. Music and logic were divine tools in his hands, woven into the fabric of justice and healing. He was also an archer, swift and precise, striking down those who defied divine laws or spread plague across lands. Yet this same god who could punish with deadly accuracy was also the one who taught humans the art of medicine through his son. As this duality, destruction and restoration, made Apollo both feared and adored. Through this story, we will explore Apollo's origins, his family, his sacred symbols, his lovers and enemies, and his impact across centuries of belief and art. We will also uncover lesser-known aspects of his mythology and how his influence evolved through Roman adaptation and modern interpretations. This is the tale of Apollo, not just as a god, but as a force of balance between reason and power, healing and justice, light and shadow. The birth of Apollo, a god born in exile. The story of Apollo begins long before his first cry echoed across the world. His mother, Leto, was a gentle and wise Titaness, daughter of Zeus and Phoebe. Her union with Zeus enraged Hera, Zeus's wife, who was infamous for her jealousy. Determined to prevent the birth of Zeus's children with Leto, Hera unleashed divine wrath, forbidding any land under the sun from giving the Titaness refuge. As Leto wandered in desperation, no city, island, or mountain dared oppose Hera's command. At last, Leto discovered Delos, a barren and floating island, not anchored to the earth, because it was not considered part of the solid landmass. Delos escaped Hera's curse. There, Leto was finally welcomed. As the island promised safety, it became sacred ground for the child to be born. With immense pain and the help of other goddesses, Leto gave birth first to Artemis, who, though only a newborn, helped deliver her twin brother, Apollo. From the moment Apollo was born, Delos' golden light spread across the sky. Olive trees bloomed. The island, once desolate and trembling, became radiant with divine energy. The birth of Apollo was no ordinary event. It symbolized the arrival of clarity, truth, and healing into a chaotic world. Immediately after his birth, Apollo was nourished with ambrosia, and within days, he matured into a strong, radiant youth. Unlike other gods whose powers developed over time, Apollo's authority was evident from the beginning. He declared his domains with confidence: music, archery, healing, and prophecy. The lyre, made from a tortoise shell and gifted by Hermes as an apology for stealing Apollo's cattle, became one of his most iconic symbols. His bow, as swift as sunlight, served as both a tool of punishment and protection. The story of Apollo's birth also highlights the bond between him and Artemis. While Apollo ruled the sun, Artemis ruled the moon. Their dual nature reflected the balance between male and female, day and night, logic and instinct. They were two sides of the same divine coin, often working together but never overlapping in purpose. Apollo's divine emergence from a mother in exile carries a powerful message. Even in adversity, greatness can be born. His life was destined not just to illuminate the physical world, but also to guide the moral and spiritual paths of gods and mortals alike. Apollo and the Oracle of Delphi, voice of divine truth. One of the most significant chapters in Apollo's myth is his connection to the Oracle of Delphi. This sacred site was not only the spiritual center of ancient Greece, but also the clearest manifestation of Apollo's prophetic power. Located on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, Delphi was believed to be the center of the world, marked by the omphalos, or navel stone. It was here that mortals journeyed from across the known world to seek answers to questions of fate, politics, war, and justice. Apollo's claim over Delphi was earned, not inherited. When he was still young, Apollo traveled to the site, which was then guarded by a monstrous serpent called Python. This creature was a child of Gaia and a guardian of ancient Thonis wisdom. However, it also posed a threat to the order Apollo sought to establish. With his silver bow and unerring aim, Apollo slew the Python, thus claiming Delphi as his own. To atone for the killing of Gaia's child, he created the Pythian Games, which honored the serpent's death and promoted peace through music and athletic competition. At Delphi, Apollo's presence was channeled through the Pythia, a high priestess who would inhale vapors from a chasm beneath the temple and enter a trance-like state. These prophecies shaped the decisions of kings, generals, and cities. Her cryptic messages were interpreted by priests and delivered to the petitioners. Apollo, through the voice of the oracle, was considered the ultimate authority on divine will. The influence of the Delphic oracle was unmatched, from the Spartan kings consulting before wars to the founding of colonies across the Mediterranean. Apollo's guidance steered history. His famous maxims such as "Know thyself and nothing in excess" were carved into the temple walls, serving as eternal reminders of his wisdom. Delphi also became a site of artistic and intellectual activity. Musicians, poets, and philosophers gathered there to perform in his honor. Apollo's role as a patron of the arts intertwined seamlessly with his role as a guide of truth. Prophecy, under Apollo, was not mere prediction. It was a tool for understanding one's place in the cosmos. Through Delphi, Apollo taught that clarity, though divine, was often wrapped in mystery. His words, though sometimes obscure, were meant to inspire reflection, humility, and wisdom. In this way, Apollo's light did not just shine, it revealed. Apollo the healer, god of medicine and plague. Apollo's influence extended deeply into the realm of health, both as a bringer of disease and as a divine healer. This duality made him unique among the Greek gods. While many deities were singular in their function, Apollo held the power to both inflict suffering and offer salvation. His touch could burn like the sun, yet his presence could soothe like music. In times of war or divine retribution, Apollo wielded his silver bow to spread plague among armies. The most famous account comes from Homer's Iliad. He passed on this sacred knowledge to his son, Asclepius. Born from the mortal woman, Apollo had entrusted Coronis to a white raven, but when the bird informed him of her infidelity, his heartbreak turned to fury. In his rage, he caused her death, but rescued the unborn child from her womb and entrusted him to the wise centaur Chiron for upbringing, where the god, angered by Agamemnon's insult to one of his priests, sent a deadly epidemic upon the Greek forces. His arrows, invisible and lethal, pierced through the air, striking down soldiers without warning. This act portrayed Apollo not as a malicious force, but as a strict enforcer of respect toward the divine and those who served it. Yet Apollo was also known for his profound compassion, especially when it came to healing and medicine. Asclepius would go on to become the most famous healer in Greek myth. Under Apollo's guidance, he mastered the art of treating disease, healing wounds, and even reviving the dead act that eventually led to his own destruction at the hands of Zeus. Yet the lineage of healing continued, and sanctuaries dedicated to Asclepius and Apollo became centers of medical study and prayer throughout Greece. Apollo's own healing abilities were often sought in desperate times. Temples in his name functioned not only as places of worship but as clinics where the sick came for relief. He could punish swiftly, but also restore what was broken. His mastery over medicine was not just about curing illness, it was about restoring balance between body, mind, and spirit. In Apollo, light was more than brightness, it was life, clarity, and renewal. These sanctuaries offered purification rituals, dream interpretation, and herbal treatments, blending divine intervention with early medical practice. Apollo's role in healing shows a god who deeply understood the human condition. Apollo and his loves, beauty, tragedy, and the divine heart. Apollo's life was filled with passionate pursuits of love, yet nearly all of them ended in sorrow. These tales reveal a god not only powerful and radiant, but also vulnerable and deeply emotional. Despite his immortality and divine stature, Apollo's heart was often broken, and his romantic endeavors brought as much pain as joy. One of the most famous and tragic of Apollo's loves was Daphne, a river nymph and daughter of the river god Penn. Struck by a golden arrow from Eros, Apollo fell instantly and hopelessly in love with her. They shared a bond of deep affection and joy, playing sports and singing together. However, one day during a discus game, Hyacinthus was struck by a discus thrown by Apollo. Some versions blame the jealous wind gods, who redirected the discus out of envy. Hyacinthus died in Apollo's arms, and from his blood sprang a flower, the hyacinthus, a lasting memory of their love. This story reflects Apollo's tenderness, as well as the tragedy of loving mortals. But Eros, offended by Apollo's arrogance, had also struck Daphne with a leaden arrow that repelled love. As Apollo pursued her, Daphne fled in fear. Her pleas for help were answered by her father, who transformed her into a laurel tree just as Apollo reached her. Devastated, Apollo embraced the tree and vowed that the laurel would forever be sacred to him. From that day on, laurel wreaths became symbols of honor, worn by poets, athletes, and emperors. Another tale is that of Hyacinthus, a beautiful Spartan youth and one of Apollo's few male lovers. Apollo also fell for the mortal woman Cassandra, daughter of the king of Troy. He offered her the gift of prophecy in exchange for her love. His love stories were not simply romantic interludes. They were essential to understanding his nature. Through them, Apollo emerges as a complex figure, divine, yet deeply human in emotion, beautiful yet burdened by desire and destiny. When she accepted the gift but later rejected his advances, Apollo cursed her so that no one would believe her predictions. Though she could foresee the fall of Troy, her warnings were dismissed. Her fate stands as one of the most haunting examples of Apollo's wrath turned bitter. These stories illuminate a different side of Apollonot, the confident god of light and music, but a being who experiences longing, rejection, and deep regret. Symbols, sacred animals, and worship of Apollo. Apollo's presence in the ancient world extended far beyond myths. He was worshipped with reverence, his image immortalized in sculpture, and his symbols carried powerful meanings. His identity was not just in his stories, but in the objects, animals, and rituals associated with him. These symbols served as bridges between the mortal world and divine understanding, each reflecting a part of Apollo's essence. One of the most iconic symbols of Apollo is the lyre, a stringed instrument that he mastered with divine eloquence. The lyre was more than a musical tool. It represented harmony, wisdom, and the balance between emotion and reason. Apollo's music could calm storms, tame wild creatures, and bring peace to human hearts. According to myth, Hermes crafted the first lyre from a tortoise shell and gave it to Apollo as an offering of reconciliation after stealing his cattle. Since then, the lyre became inseparable from the god of music. Another powerful symbol is the bow and arrows, representing both punishment and precision. Unlike the chaotic rage of other gods, Apollo's violence was calculated and often symbolic, used to defend divine order or punish disrespect. His arrows brought plague, but they also removed disease, another example of his dual nature. The laurel tree is a living reminder of his love for Daphne. Apollo wore laurel wreaths as a sign of victory and poetic inspiration. These wreaths crowned victors of the Pythian Games and were adopted later by Roman emperors as symbols of divine favor. Several animals were sacred to Apollo. He was present in the lives of poets, doctors, athletes, and seers. His light guided them not just in myth, but in daily devotion, in the rhythm of music, the clarity of thought, and the pursuit of excellence. The swan, associated with beauty and song, often accompanied him in myths. Temples dedicated to him stood not only in Delphi and Delos, but throughout the Greek world. Festivals such as the Thargelia and Carnea honored him with music, games, and offerings. The Pythian Games, held every 4 years in Delphi, featured athletic and musical competitions, reflecting his dual domains of physical and artistic excellence. The raven, originally white, was Apollo's messenger bird. After delivering bad news about Coronis's betrayal, the bird was scorched black in Apollo's rage, turning it into a symbol of ill omen. The wolf, too, was linked to Apollo's more primal, hunting aspect, especially in his earlier depictions as a protector of flocks. Apollo's worship was widespread. Through his symbols and sacred rites, Apollo was more than a distant deity. Apollo and his divine family, bonds of power and rivalry. Apollo's place in the Greek pantheon is deeply connected to his complex and influential family. As the son of Zeus, the ruler of Olympus, and the Titaness Leto, Apollo was born into divine power, but also inherited the tension that came with it. His relationships with family members shaped much of his identity, revealing the interplay of loyalty, rivalry, and purpose within the divine order. His closest bond was with his twin sister, Artemis, goddess of the hunt, wilderness, and the moon. Though they governed different domains, their connection was unbreakable. Zeus entrusted him with significant roles: prophecy, law, and healing, making Apollo a guardian of cosmic balance. Despite this, Apollo did not always align with Zeus's decisions. His defiance in certain myths, such as his attempt to avenge the death of his son Asclepius, or his rebellion during the Trojan War, shows that Apollo, while respectful, had his own sense of justice and responsibility. Artemis, fierce and independent, often mirrored Apollo's determination and sense of justice. They acted as complementary forces: sun and moon, reason and instinct, masculinity and femininity. In several myths, they stood together in defense of their mother or in punishing mortals who offended the gods. Their unity displayed an ideal harmony rarely seen among the Olympians. Apollo's father, Zeus, was the ultimate authority among the gods. Although Zeus had countless offspring, Apollo was among the most favored. His mother, Leto, remained a symbol of endurance and dignity. Her persecution by Hera and her protective strength during Apollo's birth created a foundation of compassion and resilience that echoed in Apollo's own behavior, especially in his gentler roles as healer and protector of youth. Apollo also had complex interactions with his half-sister. With Hermes, god of travel and trickery, Apollo shared both conflict and camaraderie. Their early clash, when Hermes stole Apollo's cattle, ended in reconciliation. He was not isolated in greatness, but shaped by the presence of those around him. Each bond, whether forged through love, loyalty, or rivalry, reflected the complexity of a god who balanced reason with emotion, duty with defiance, and power with wisdom. With Hermes gifting the lyre and forging a lasting friendship, this showed Apollo's ability to forgive and recognize genius even in mischief. In contrast, his rivalry with Ares, the god of war, highlighted their different values. Ares thrived on raw aggression, while Apollo stood for calculated justice and order. Though both were powerful warriors, Apollo's methods were guided by logic and foresight rather than impulse. Through these divine relationships, Apollo's character is enriched. Apollo in the Roman world, transformation into Apollo. As Greek influence spread across the Mediterranean, the myths and gods of Olympus traveled with it. Among the deities adopted by the Romans, Apollo stood out as one of the few whose name and identity remained almost entirely intact. Unlike other Greek gods who were renamed in Roman mythology, emperors such as Augustus saw Apollo not just as a god of healing and music, but as a symbol of imperial destiny. Augustus, in particular, claimed Apollo's favor, building the Temple of Apollo on the Palatine Hill and associating the god with his reign. By aligning with Apollo, Augustus cast himself as a bringer of peace and renewal, echoing the god's light-driven nature. Apollo was revered under the same name and acknowledgement of his unique and powerful presence. Yet in Rome, Apollo evolved. His roles were emphasized differently, and his worship was shaped by the cultural and political needs of a rising empire. One of the most significant transformations came with his role as Apollo Medic in 431 BCE, during a devastating plague. The Romans built a temple in his honor after consulting the Sibylline books. His healing powers, already central to his identity in Greece, were now elevated in Rome as essential to public health and divine protection. He became the patron of physicians, and his name was invoked during outbreaks and illnesses, both in the city and on military campaigns. Apollo's association with prophecy and order also made him attractive to Roman leaders, especially during periods of crises. In Roman art and architecture, Apollo was frequently depicted as the ideal of youth and beauty, smooth, athletic, and serene. Statues of Apollo adorned public spaces, emphasizing both the aesthetic and moral order he represented. The famous Apollo Belvedere, a Roman copy of a Greek original, became one of the most celebrated sculptures of antiquity, embodying divine perfection. Despite these continuities, the Roman Apollo was less focused on personal myths and more on civic symbolism. His role became less about his tragic loves or divine rivalries, and more about guidance, order, and imperial legitimacy. He represented what Rome aspired to be: rational, powerful, disciplined, and enlightened. Through this cultural transition, Apollo proved adaptable and enduring. He was no longer just the god of Delos and Delphi, but now the protector of an empire. His light did not fade. With Greece it grew stronger in Rome, reshaped for a new world and a new purpose, yet always carrying the same golden essence of truth, music, healing, and prophecy. The fall of Apollo's worship, from divine radiance to forgotten temples. For centuries, Apollo's name echoed through temples, hymns, and oracles. His influence stretched from the sun-drenched islands of Greece to the grand forums of Rome. But as the classical world began to fade, even as Christianity gained prominence after Emperor Constantine's conversion in the 4th century CE, pagan traditions remained deeply rooted in Roman society. Apollo, as a symbol of health, truth, and reason, still held relevance. Many Romans continued to offer prayers at his temples, particularly during times of plague or famine. So too did the worship of Apollo. The rise of Christianity in the late Roman Empire marked a profound shift not just in theology, but in culture, politics, and identity. Gods like Apollo, once central to life and thought, were gradually cast into the shadows of history. The process was neither instant nor absolute. However, by the time of Emperor Theodosius I, who ruled in the late 4th century, Christianity had become the official state religion of the Roman Empire. Theodosius issued edicts that banned all pagan rituals and closed temples across the empire. The Oracle of Delphi, once the heartbeat of Apollo's prophetic power, fell silent. The temples in Delos in Rome were abandoned, repurposed, or destroyed. Apollo's sacred spaces became relics. Some were stripped of their statues and wealth. Others were left to decay under vines and rubble. Priests who had once spoken his words were dismissed or silenced. In time, the myths of Apollo were no longer seen as divine truths, but as stories from a forgotten era. Legends. The sun still rises with his name in our poetry. Medical institutions bear the mark of his sun. His face adorns artworks, coins, and academic emblems. Though the temples may be silent, Apollo's story continues to shine, transformed from god to idea, from worship to memory, from flame to echo, remembered only by poets, philosophers, and historians. Yet Apollo was not entirely lost. His name lived on in literature, preserved by writers such as Ovid and Homer, whose works were studied even in Christian schools. Artists of the Renaissance, fascinated by classical beauty and ancient symbolism, resurrected Apollo in sculpture, painting, and poetry. He returned, not as a deity to be worshipped, but as an eternal symbol of beauty, knowledge, and light. Even today, Apollo's legacy persists. Apollo's enduring legacy. Light beyond myth. Though Apollo is no longer worshipped in temples or summoned in oracles, his legacy has endured for over 2 millennia. He has outlived the fall of ancient Greece, the rise and collapse of Rome, and the spread of modern religions. His image remains one of the most iconic in Western civilization, not only as a mythological figure, but as a lasting cultural symbol of clarity, balance, beauty, and knowledge. In philosophy, Apollo represents rationality and order. The term Apollonian, coined by Friedrich Nietzsche, the rod of Asclepius, a symbol derived from Apollo's sun, remains the international emblem of healing and healthcare. In this way, Apollo's connection to medicine still guides humanity's fight against disease. His principles of restoring balance, treating illness, and respecting life continue to shape modern ethics and healing. Contrasts with the Dionysian to describe two opposing forces in human nature: reason versus chaos, logic versus passion. This concept influenced generations of thinkers, writers, and artists who saw in Apollo the ideal of disciplined creativity. He became the embodiment of measured brilliance, where emotion is channeled through structure. In science and medicine, his influence is subtle yet unmistakable. In the arts, Apollo's legacy is most visibly alive. He is the muse of musicians, poets, and sculptors. The United States named its lunar missions the Apollo program. It is the story of civilization's search for meaning through art, reason, healing, and truth. He is the symbol of what it means to seek clarity in darkness, to heal what is broken, and to understand the universe through harmony, a deliberate reference to the God of light and knowledge. When Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon in 1969, he carried not only human dreams but the symbolic torch of Apollo, a god who always reached beyond the known. His face, serene and youthful, was idealized by Renaissance artists like Michelangelo and Raphael. His lyre, once divine, inspired the development of stringed instruments. Apollo still lives in libraries, hospitals, observatories, and concert halls. His myth has become a metaphor, his power transformed into legacy, and that legacy continues to shine as radiant and eternal as the sun itself. Concert halls, theaters, and music competitions still evoke his name as a guardian of harmony and inspiration. Even in modern space exploration, Apollo's light guided humanity. Apollo's journey is not just the story of a sun god, though no altars rise in his name.